Hello, and welcome to the Cloudian HyperIQ demo. HyperIQ provides IT professionals with data and actionable insights to monitor their Hyperstore clusters, respond to system-wide performance changes, optimize resource utilization, and get a unified view of operational health. HyperIQ collects monitoring and operational data from logs, system metrics, and events, providing you with a unified view of user and system resource activity. I'll turn this over now to Sid, our product manager for HyperIQ, to cover the basics, then I'll dive in later to cover some of the newer features.
For this demo, I have deployed it to monitor an internal cluster that has 12 nodes across 3 data centers. After you log in, it takes you to the main dashboard. When we run a large-scale storage environment, there are 3 things that we care about most. Infrastructure status, that is covered in this dashboard, application performance, which is covered in the services, and user analytics, which is under S3 Analytics dashboard. Let's start with the infrastructure monitoring. In the overview section, you can monitor the overall health, usage, and performance of the cluster. It can be filtered by region, data center, or nodes. Top section covers the health of the cluster and pre-created alerts. These alerts are configurable based on your workload, and for instant notifications, you can pick a channel from the list of supported channels such as email, Slack, PagerDuty, and others. Below that, you can see the capacity usage over time and how data is getting balanced across all the nodes in your cluster. Then we have the receive and transmit network traffic details across all the nodes. By default, it shows you data for last 1 hour, but you can select your own time range in the top right corner. If you notice something unusual, you can zoom into that and it filters all the other panels for that time range. Based on what information you are looking to drill down into, there are different sections for disks, network, file system, NTP, and other hardware details. As a storage provider, disks are an integral part of our solution. When you expand this section, you can see how data is getting balanced across all the disks, the read and write IOPS, the latency, and current reads and writes that are in progress. This data helps us to identify potential issues proactively before they impact operations in your data center. Network monitoring is another critical part of distributed infrastructure. To address that, HyperIQ captures details about every interface on every node in your cluster. It also includes the panels for network throughput, packet drops, traffic errors, and other metrics that you might need for troubleshooting. After verifying the server level details, you can move to the services dashboard to get visibility into processes and services within Hyperstore application. In addition to the 3 filters from the previous dashboard, here we have an additional filter for the services that are running on Hyperstore. To compare the usage of a service across the nodes and data centers, you can select it from the drop-down menu. This helps you to understand how different services on Hyperstore are performing. You can use this data to compare the performance of storage layer with various end-user applications and tune the system to optimize the performance. Typically, this is where conventional monitoring tools stop. But in HyperIQ, we provide real-time visibility into user activity. How they are using the system, are they getting good service, or if their usage is impacting the system performance in any way. That takes us to the S3 Analytics dashboard. Suppose I want to view the user activity for the last 2 days. You can select the time range from here. Now it shows me how many users were active on the system, how many buckets did they access, and how much data did they download and upload. Below that, you can view the distribution of top users and buckets by number of transactions. You can also view the client IP addresses from which most of the requests are coming. Next to that, you can view the distribution of different S3 API calls. This information is especially useful if you are a service provider or if you are managing the IT access for multiple groups and users within your company. To get further insights into users, you can scroll down and look at the summary activity tables. Here, for every user, you can view the amount of data downloaded and uploaded, and you can track how many gets, puts, heads, and deletes have they executed. If you have a compliance policy within the company to delete the data, say every 60 days, HyperIQ helps you to track and enforce those policies on user level. You can filter this information further on the bucket level. If you want to monitor a specific user and all the buckets that they own, you can use the filters at the top. After you select a user, you can see from which bucket did they upload or download the data and the number of transactions that they carried out. You can also view the number of error response codes that your end users might have experienced on the bucket level. This helps you to identify if there is any misconfiguration on any of your buckets. For a historical view of the user activity for the selected time range, here you can see the trend and count for every S3 API call executed by the user. You can also track their download and upload activity at the bucket level. Since Hyperstore is a native S3 object storage, you can use it with any end-user application that supports S3 protocol. This could be a backup application, a video management software, or any media asset manager. If your users or applications connected to the object storage are experiencing any performance issues, HyperIQ helps you to troubleshoot that at bucket level. Different applications generate different file sizes, and depending on whether they are small or large files, it might impact the request and response durations differently on the system. Normally, monitoring tools only show you the latency on a system level, but in HyperIQ, it is more granular and you can view that on a bucket level.
That was a good intro to HyperIQ. Let's dive in and highlight some of the newer features which have been added recently. Cloudian offers MultiCluster Monitoring, along with monitoring object lock transactions to help enhance protection against things like ransomware. Cross-region replication monitoring, and all these can be fed into the new custom alerting feature, and to tie everything together in the enterprise, HyperIQ has LDAP integration. Let's get started by looking at MultiCluster monitoring. From the main dashboard in HyperIQ, you can drill down into either the clusters, the regions, the data centers, or into individual nodes being monitored. We can go back and select one of the clusters and take a look. This limits our view to just the nodes within that cluster. We can further drill down into an individual node if we want. We can also go back and select multiple clusters at the same time. We can then reset back to all the nodes for both those clusters. When we have a selection, we can dive into some of the services and analytics that are available. Here we can get a good deep understanding of what is happening in the cluster. Now we can take a look at monitoring object lock transactions. The object lock transactions are located under the S3 Analytics dashboard. We can now select a cluster where object lock is enabled. We can then scroll down to find the panel for worm transaction info. Here we can zoom in on the panel and get a look. We can, if we want, drill into a time range which is more interesting for us. We can now see all the object lock transactions that are going on per bucket inside the Hyperstore. Monitoring cross-region replication within HyperIQ. Cross-region replication is located under the S3 Analytics tab. We can scroll down and expand the CRR Operation Info panel. Here, we can take a look at the operation count, operation size, and duration per bucket. We can open up any one of these panels for CRR. Once our panel is open, we can zoom in on a timeline at a point of interest. If we choose to go any further, we can zoom in another time. If at any point we would like to back out of our zooming in, we can go to the upper right and reset the graph period to a different timeline. All this together gives you a good understanding of what your Hyperstore clusters are doing with their CRR workloads. Create custom alerting within the HyperIQ. Custom alerts can be set up by using PromQL, or Prometheus query language. This example will search for 404 HTTP status codes and alert if a threshold is exceeded within a time range. To view custom alerts, you can add /Prometheus/alerts to your HyperIQ URL. Here we can see the sample code loaded as an alert catching 404 status codes. These alerts can be extended to anything that Prometheus is collecting. Additionally, alerts can be sent via email, Slack, or text within your organization. And last, we will cover LDAP AD integration with HyperIQ. In the HyperIQ GUI, we can click on the gear and choose users to get a list of all HyperIQ users. We will then try to log in to a user that exists in AD but not within the HyperIQ instance. We will use HyperIQ Demo 1. This will contact the AD server and authenticate for us. We can switch back to our admin session. Here, we can go back to users and we can refresh the list. And our new HyperIQ demo user now shows. We can further test the integration with AD by logging out of HyperIQ Demo 1 user that we had used previously. On the AD server, we will disable the account HyperIQ Demo 1. We will then attempt to log into the HyperIQ GUI with HyperIQ Demo 1. This should fail since the account is now disabled within the domain. We can then go back to the AD system and we can re-enable the HyperIQ Demo 1 account. Once this is done, we can go back into our HyperIQ and attempt to log in again. This will now go through for us. And now we are back inside HyperIQ. And that covers 5 of the new features in the latest version of HyperIQ. Thank you for your time.